So Dune Awakening, being a sandbox survival MMO, is going to have many different systems, being focused more on survival elements or being more focused on MMO elements. But one of the most important systems in the entirety of the game that I think ties together all of the different elements of this world is going to be the exchange, which is going to be a player market or an auction house where you can buy or sell pretty much anything in the game to other players. And I want to go over all of the different ways in which this exchange is going to be so important for the game, and even more so if you want to be a fully PvE focused player. Now, the exchange system itself, I think, is actually kind of basic if you played any other MMOs that have an auction house or a market or anything like that. You can take the items, and you could take pretty much any item in the game. You can take it to one of the hub cities, and you can put it on the market, put it up for any amount of spice that you want, and other players can then go to the market and buy it from you. You'll get the spice, they'll get the items. Now, where the exchange becomes truly interesting and very integral to a lot of the development of the game is all of the other systems that tie into that and are able to be sold on the exchange. Now, before we go over all these different systems, we have to go over a small explanation of the difference between Haga Basin and the Deep Desert. These are the two main zones on launch of the game. Haga Basin is the first place you go. It's the size of Conan Exiles, their previous game, so it's a very large map. You'll be able to have like 40 people on that. Once you start the game and go into a Haga Basin, it'll put you on a bunch of these different sieges, which are kind of channels, but a bit more permanent than that. This isn't really the MMO focused area. Haga Basin is like 98% PvE. There's only small little areas you can actually PvP there. This is where you'll be building essentially permanent bases that if you keep your shields up, they're pretty much unraidable. You're not going to be getting damaged by sandstorms or anything like that. So this is a much more permanent area with less players on the map overall, but there's also tons of other content. There's dungeons, there's points of interest, there's resources to gather, there's sandworms to try to not get eaten by. And the developers have said there's around 100 hours of content here, probably excluding just farming up tons of additional resources and farming a bunch of recipes or something like that. But this is the first place you're going to go. This is primarily PvE focused. Once you get your first flying vehicle, the Ornithopter, you can then leave this area and go to either the hub areas like we mentioned, or go to the other main zone, which is the Deep Desert. The Deep Desert is primarily PvP focused. It's almost fully open PvP. There's only a small pocket of PvP there. It's going to be much larger than Haga Basin. It's going to be absolutely massive. It's going to be split up into these 9 different meshes. So each one of those different meshes is going to be hosted on a different server, meaning it's going to have its own player cap, but there's no instancing or sharding of the Deep Desert. The overarching world you choose when you start Dune Awakening is going to dictate all of the people you can see in the Deep Desert. So if you're in one spot in the Deep Desert, another player on your world is there, you will always see them. And the Deep Desert is going to have just a lot more content in it because it's so much bigger. It's going to have a lot more valuable resources. It's going to have a lot more resources. This is where the massive spice blows are going to be. So this is going to be kind of the end game focus area, but it's all open PvP. So that puts a pretty big wrench into the game if you want to be PvE focused. And a really big part of the Deep Desert is that a Coriolis storm comes through every week and wipes the Deep Desert. So it wipes away all player buildings. It changes up dungeons and points of interest. It changes up where resources are. And if you've created any maps for the Deep Desert, those only work for that week as well. So to start off, we have a system that's going to be very important if you either love building or completely hate building. And this is the blueprinting system. Now in Dune Awakening, the building system actually has a lot of really nice quality of life features. One of them being that you can start your building with just these holograms that then you place building pieces into. Now this allows you to place these holograms down and build up a base, build up the layout, do all of those types of things without having to actually put in the resources to do it. So if you're building a base and you mess something up, you can just keep using the holograms and it's completely free. You can move them as much as you want. Took no resources. This will also allow other players you're playing with that have permissions to also change those holograms before you put resources into them, and also be able to just put resources in to help you build much more easily. And this is important because it ties back into this blueprinting system where once you have built a full base, you can blueprint and make a copy of that base as a blueprint, and you can trade that blueprint to other players or go put it on the exchange. So essentially, if you're a good base builder, you can build up this really cool base. Maybe it's a super defensible base. Maybe it's a bunker to go use in the deep desert. You can then make that base, go put that blueprint on the exchange, sell it for spice. Another player can go on the exchange and look through the blueprints. They also have this really cool system where when you're looking at blueprints of buildings, you can actually see a 3D model of the building when you're just looking at them, so you can easily see what type of building it is, how it's built, and see if you actually want to buy it. And when people buy that blueprint and take it and go out to, say, the deep desert or anywhere else, they can place down a hologram of a full base and then just start putting the resources into it. And while I don't think this is going to be as important for Haga Basin, because you have essentially infinite time to build there and you're not going to be getting raided or anything like that, in the deep desert, this is going to be very important because the deep desert is wiped every week. So primarily for the deep desert, you're going to want to put up buildings fast at the start of a new week, especially for the big PvP guilds, and you're going to want them to be built efficiently so they're easy to use, so they're defensible, and maybe even make some type of bunkers. So if you're, say, in a big PvP guild or even a smaller group and you want to go take over an area, there's a lot of resources in the deep desert, you could go to the exchange, buy a really defensible base blueprint, quickly go to the deep desert, place down the hologram of this blueprint, put in all the resources, and boom, you've built a full base that someone else potentially took dozens of hours to create and optimize. And you'll start to notice as we go over more and more of these systems that tie back into the exchange, that these are a lot of these systems that will allow you to play Dune Awakening like you want, which is really what a sandbox is good for. Let's say you're a PvE focused player that never wants to go to the deep desert, but you really like building. You could stay in Haga Basin, farming resources, perfecting your base builds, and then turn them into blueprints and go sell them on the exchange for tons of spice. And that could be what you primarily do to earn spice. Then you could go back to the exchange and buy any of the different items from the game, even items that you may have to go to the deep desert to normally get. You could just buy them from the players that are going there and farming it, essentially allowing somebody who only stays in Haga Basin doing one specific thing to be able to still earn everything else in the game, probably at a slower rate than somebody who's in a big PvP group going to the deep desert, but you'll still be able to earn and obtain all of the items in the game. Now, another system that plays a similar role to blueprinting is Cartography. Now, this is a really interesting system that I haven't heard much of in a lot of other games, but this is essentially map making in Dune Awakening. Now, I don't think this is going to be super important in Haga Basin because Haga Basin isn't something that's wiped and changed on a weekly basis, even though I think you still will use this somewhat in Haga Basin, at least when you're first progressing through it. But in the deep desert, this is going to be a very important system because with Cartography, you can go and start to map out the deep desert or Haga Basin, which will show you on your actual in-game map where all of the resources are, how good these resources are, where points of interest are, where dungeons are. It'll pretty much just start revealing everything on the map. So if you're somebody that really likes doing cartography, you can go to the deep desert, start unveiling the map, and then go take that map and go sell it on the exchange to other players. Now, this is going to be important for the deep desert every week because as the resources move around, as points of interest change, as new dungeons open up and old dungeons close for that week, being able to find the best areas, the areas with the most lucrative resources, the areas with the best dungeons, all of that is going to be important, especially for bigger guilds to find early on. Now, why this is also going to be important is because there are 81 different areas that you have to unveil with Cartography. And I'm not exactly sure how long this is actually going to take, but the way the developers are talking about this is that it will actually take a good amount of time, even for really good focused cartographers. So being that person or one of the handful of people on your overarching world that people know is the best cartographers that get the maps out the quickest and are the most skilled at it will be able to just make a ridiculous amount of spice by selling these maps on the exchange. And a lot of the big groups on your world are definitely going to want these because if they can get to that best resource spot or a really lucrative resource spot and put down some really armored or defensible bases in that area, they're pretty much going to own that for the rest of the week unless another really big guild tries to fight them over it, and they're still going to have an upper hand. And while you will have to go to the deep desert to actually do this, so So a fully focused PvE player might not want to do it. A lot of primarily focused PvE players can still also do it because the deep desert's so massive. You're not going to be seeing players just absolutely everywhere, and you can just use like really fast ornithopters and try to skirt around all the big groups and all the PvP, and you still should be able to do this being a primarily PvE focused player. You'll sell these maps, make a lot of spice, and again, be able to buy anything that comes out of the deep desert from the PvP players on the exchange. And then we have what I think may be the most important system that ties back into the exchange, the schematic system. So Dune Awakening works in a similar way to a lot of other MMOs or survival games or RPGs, where you can craft most of the items in the game or a lot of the items in the game as these base recipes that you learn through your technology tree that you get points from for leveling up. So these are all kind of the base items, your base building pieces, your base vehicles, base weapons, all that type of stuff, the most basic version of those items. But then if you want to get higher rarity and better versions of those items, you have to go do any content throughout the game, do dungeons, kill enemies, loot chests, pretty much any of the PvE focused content. You can find higher rarity or better schematics. Now you'll be able to sell those schematics on the exchange or craft the items, then sell those crafted items on the exchange. And this gets really crazy when you get to the highest rarity called unique schematics. Now unique schematics are seeming to be purple. They're the highest rarity, meaning they're going to be the best items in the game or probably the best items in the game. And they are actually unique items. Like a lot of them have lore with them. They have different properties than a lot of the other same items. Like you could get a unique schematic for a harvesting tool and it would still be a harvesting tool, but it would be named, it would have some amount of lore with it, and it would have some other property. Like maybe one would be really good at harvesting a specific type of material or something like that. And like all of the other schematics and pretty much everything else in the game, you'll be able to sell these on the market or craft the items and sell the items on the market. But where unique schematics get really crazy is they have a limited amount of uses before the schematic is just done. And for uniques, it's one. If you get a unique schematic, you can only craft it once. You can make one item and the schematic is done. You can't use it anymore. And just that base fact means unique schematics and unique items you craft from them are going to be very valuable on the exchange. There are probably going to be a lot of them that craft items that aren't very good or aren't super sought after, that maybe won't be super expensive. Probably all the best items are going to be from these uniques. They're going to be super expensive to craft, so even just selling the recipes can be really lucrative. And the better ones are probably going to be the most expensive things in the game on the market. And while in Haga Basin, this is primarily going to be a time investment sort of thing, a spice per hour if you find a good unique schematic that drops in like a dungeon or something, because the Haga Basin doesn't change, the dungeons don't change, and we don't think the unique schematic drops are going to change. It's really just finding areas that are good to farm that you can get them from and farming them in Haga Basin. And it's kind of just spice per hour there. But once you get to the deep desert, this gets much crazier because that Coriolis storm will come through and wipe away and change up the deep desert every week. So you could go to a dungeon in 1 week in the deep desert and it could drop this unique schematic of, say, a las gun that's super good. Everybody wants it. It's really good for PvP, but you'll have to farm it a ton because you can only craft one per schematic or just sell the schematics. So let's say you're a player that goes in there and just farms that dungeon over and over that week. You have a big stockpile of crafted las guns and a bunch of recipes. Well, the Coriolis storm could come through, change up the deep desert and wipe it that week, and that dungeon could be filled in and not accessible anymore. And because of the somewhat random elements of how this resetting process is going to work, that dungeon could not open up for weeks later. So you could legitimately be the only person on your world with those unique las guns left and those unique schematics left over until that dungeon reopens on another weekly reset of the deep desert. So the unique schematic system is going to play a really crazy role in the overall economy, especially if you find something really crazy in the deep desert and not a lot of other people are farming it. So while in Haga Basin, it's kind of just finding the recipes and spending the time to farm them. So how much spice are you getting per hour? In the deep desert, there is a lot more timing involved and there's a lot more supply and demand involved. And I think those are a lot of the main systems that are going to have a really big impact on the exchange and how players just play the game of Dune Awakening, and a lot of these systems are what are going to allow these players to play the game exactly how they want to, whether they want to completely focus on big, large-scale PvP, if they want to completely focus on base building, if they want to focus on just being a PvE player in Haga Basin and farming and crafting things. The exchange and being able to sell basically everything in the game is going to facilitate a lot of that. And obviously outside of that, you'll be able to sell pretty much everything else. Pretty much any resources you'll get, you'll be able to go sell to players. You'll be able to go craft base vehicles or base vehicle parts and go sell those to players on the exchange. So pretty much everything you could think of, you'll be able to go sell on the exchange and make spice through that. And hopefully they've developed a lot of these systems with good safeguards so the economy stays really strong and really consistent. Because another really big thing that I think plays into this is there are just so many different items in Dune Awakening, and there's just such a wide swath of these base resources or special crafting items or pieces that you need to craft different things that I think it'll keep the economy and the exchange pretty healthy. Because some MMOs or games with auction houses or markets that you play, you'll notice that they just don't have enough items in the game. So after a bit, those items lose a lot of their value because there's only so many things to farm, and there's so many players farming the same things that they all just lose all of their value and they're not worth much. If you have just ridiculous amounts of items, all these schematics that are only one-time use, there's just a large swath of items. So if something is being overly farmed, you can always go to something else and there'll always be enough items to allow you to do that. And this is one of the things I'm very excited for Dune Awakening. In every MMO I play, I'm somebody who will play the auction house or play the market at least somewhat, and I like that gameplay loop of being able to try to find the items that people are currently wanting to get a lot more value for your time, and just doing that type of currency farm and selling to other players. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.